Ayana Amelia could feel the adrenaline rushing through her veins as her car sped down the empty highway. The world around her blurred into streaks of light, the distant hum of the engine drowning out Vanessa's panicked voice beside her. "Ayana, slow down. You're going to get us killed," Vanessa shrieked, clutching the dashboard with white-knuckled hands. Ayana only laughed, the sound wild and carefree, her foot pressing harder on the gas pedal. "Relax, babe. I've got this. I'm a pro driver, remember?" she teased, ignoring the beads of sweat forming on her friend's brow. The car swerved slightly as Ayana turned sharply, and Vanessa let out a scream. Ayana smirked, amused by her friend's dramatic reaction, but before she could say more, the blaring sound of a police siren filled the air. "Damn it," Ayana muttered, glancing at the rearview mirror to see flashing red and blue lights closing in behind her. "See? I told you," Vanessa shouted. "Now we're in trouble." Ayana rolled her eyes, easing off the gas but not stopping completely. "Trouble's my middle name." The police car overtook them, cutting them off, and a tall figure stepped out, his broad shoulders illuminated by the streetlights. Officer Roderick Franco. Ayana's heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but because of the undeniable presence he exuded. His sharp jawline, piercing eyes, and authoritative stride made him look like he'd stepped out of a law enforcement action movie. He gestured for her to lower her window, and she complied, leaning on the steering wheel with a defiant smirk. "Evening, officer. Did I do something wrong?" Roderick's cold, steady gaze met hers. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "Oh, come on," Ayana replied with a dramatic sigh. "It's just a little speeding. No harm done, right?" "I won't repeat myself," Roderick said, his tone firm and commanding. Ayana reluctantly stepped out, raising her hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. Arrest me, Mr. Officer. But let me warn you, I'm not an easy prisoner." Her playful taunt only seemed to irritate him further. Without a word, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back, securing the handcuffs with a practiced efficiency. The cold metal bit into her skin, but Ayana couldn't resist another smirk. "Ah, so rough. You could have just asked nicely," she teased, winking over her shoulder. Roderick's jaw tightened, and he pressed her against the car. "Keep quiet," he growled, his patience wearing thin. The ride to the precinct was tense. Ayana, still handcuffed, sprawled on the back seat of the police car, her playful grin never leaving her face. "Can't you at least cuff me in front? These are killing my wrists," she complained, shifting uncomfortably. Roderick ignored her, his focus on the road ahead. Vanessa, seated beside him, shot Ayana a glare. "Can you stop making things worse? He's already pissed off." "Pissed off?" Ayana feigned innocence. "I think Mr. Officer here secretly enjoys this. Don't you, Officer Franco?" Roderick's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but he didn't respond. Ayana's antics were testing his professionalism, but he refused to let her get under his skin. When they arrived at the station, Ayana was escorted inside, her cousin Warren already waiting for her. "What the hell, Ayana?" Warren barked, his face a mix of anger and exasperation. "Reckless driving? Drunk driving? Are you trying to ruin your life?" "Relax, Kaus," Ayana replied, shrugging. "It's not like anyone got hurt." "That's not the point," Warren snapped. "Do you have any idea how this affects the family? Our reputation? My job?" Ayana rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go again with the family reputation lecture. Newsflash, Warren. I don't care." Warren looked like he wanted to strangle her, but Roderick's voice interrupted the tense exchange. "She's facing multiple charges," he informed Warren. "Reckless driving, endangerment, and driving under the influence. This isn't something you can sweep under the rug." Ayana raised an eyebrow, impressed by Roderick's unwavering stance. "Wow, Mr. Franco, you really don't take bribes, do you?" Roderick shot her a glare, his tone icy. "Actions have consequences, Ms. Amelia." Hours passed, and Ayana found herself sitting in a holding cell, her usual confidence wavering slightly. She hated being confined, but a part of her couldn't stop thinking about Roderick. Vanessa sat beside her, arms crossed. "Do you ever think about anyone but yourself?" "Of course," Ayana replied. "I think about you all the time, babe." Vanessa groaned, her frustration evident. "You're impossible." Before Ayana could respond, the cell door opened and Roderick entered, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Amelia, you're free to go for now," he said. Ayana stood, brushing imaginary dust off her clothes. "Ah, does this mean you'll miss me, Officer Franco?" Roderick's lips twitched, but he quickly masked it with his usual stoicism. "Don't test me." As Ayana left the station, Warren pulled her aside. "You need to get your act together, Ayana. This isn't a game." "Maybe not to you," she replied, her tone sharp, "but it's my life, not yours." Roderick watched the exchange from a distance, his jaw tightening. Despite Ayana's infuriating personality, he couldn't ignore the glimmers of vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "Stay out of trouble," he called out as Ayana walked past him. She stopped, turning to face him with a mischievous smile. "What if I don't?" Roderick didn't answer, but the intensity in his gaze spoke volumes. Ayana felt a strange flutter in her chest, but she quickly brushed it off. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself as she got into Warren's car. Roderick watched her leave, his mind conflicted. He didn't want to get involved, but something about Ayana Amelia made it impossible to stay away. A week passed since Ayana's dramatic run-in with Officer Roderick Franco. For most people, such an encounter would be a sobering experience. For Ayana, it was fuel for her rebellious streak. She had spent the past few days attending parties, ignoring calls from her cousin Warren, and reveling in the freedom of her careless lifestyle. But deep down, a nagging thought lingered. The image of Officer Franco's stern yet striking face kept resurfacing in her mind. One evening, Ayana decided to visit a local cafe she frequented when she needed a break from the chaos. As she sipped her latte, she spotted a familiar figure entering the cafe. It was Roderick, looking just as composed and intimidating as she remembered. Ayana's lips curled into a sly smile. Well, if it isn't Officer Perfect." Roderick glanced her way, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had come to the cafe for a quiet moment, not a run-in with the woman who had been occupying his thoughts more than he cared to admit. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone neutral but firm. "Drinking coffee," she replied with a smirk. "Or is that illegal now too?" Roderick sighed, clearly not in the mood for her antics. "I didn't peg you as the type to enjoy quiet places like this." "Shows what you know about me," Ayana shot back, leaning forward. "Why don't you sit and find out?" He hesitated, but eventually sat across from her, his expression guarded. "You're not going to cause a scene, are you?" "Depends. Are you going to arrest me again?" Roderick couldn't help the small twitch of a smile that played on his lips, though he quickly masked it. "You're impossible." "I've been told," Ayana replied, her tone teasing. As they spoke, Ayana found herself surprisingly intrigued by Roderick's composed demeanor. He wasn't just a by-the-books cop, there was a depth to him she hadn't noticed before. Meanwhile, Roderick couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Ayana, even as he tried to keep his guard up. The next day, Warren confronted Ayana at her apartment. "You've been avoiding me," he accused, his frustration evident. "Maybe because all you ever do is lecture me," Ayana replied, rolling her eyes. "This isn't a joke, Ayana. You're spiraling out of control, and it's only a matter of time before you hit rock bottom." Ayana's expression hardened. "You don't know anything about me, Warren. You've always looked down on me like I'm some failure. Newsflash, I don't need your approval." Warren's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm not here to fight with you. I just want you to realize that you're better than this. Stop running from whatever it is you're trying to avoid." Ayana turned away, her walls firmly in place. "You can go now, Warren. I'm fine." As Warren left, Ayana sat in silence, his words echoing in her mind. She hated to admit it, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Later that night, Ayana found herself at another party, drowning her frustrations in music and drinks. She was the life of the party, dancing with reckless abandon, but beneath her carefree facade, a storm was brewing. She didn't notice the man watching her from across the room. His predatory gaze locked on her every move. As the night wore on, the man approached her, his intentions far from innocent. "Hey there," he said, his voice low and unsettling. "You look like you could use some company." Ayana, tipsy but not oblivious, tried to brush him off. Not interested. But the man didn't take no for an answer. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Come on, don't be like that." Before Ayana could react, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Let her go," Roderick said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The man turned to face him, his bravado faltering under Roderick's intense gaze. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone you don't want to mess with," Roderick replied, stepping closer. The man released Ayana and quickly disappeared into the crowd. Ayana blinked in surprise, her drunken haze making it hard to process what had just happened. "Roderick, what are you doing here?" "Keeping an eye on you," he admitted, his expression serious. "You're reckless, Ayana. Someone has to make sure you don't get yourself killed." Ayana frowned, her pride bristling. "I don't need a babysitter." "Clearly, you do," Roderick shot back. "You don't think about the consequences of your actions." Their argument was interrupted by a sudden downpour outside. Roderick offered her his jacket, but Ayana stubbornly refused. "I'm fine," she insisted, shivering as the rain soaked her. Roderick sighed and draped the jacket over her shoulders anyway. "You're impossible," he muttered, though there was a hint of warmth in his voice. The rain forced them to seek shelter in a small, run-down gazebo nearby. Ayana sat on the bench, hugging Roderick's jacket around her, while he stood at the edge, watching the rain fall. "Why do you care so much?" Ayana asked, her voice softer than usual. Roderick turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do." Ayana looked away, her defenses crumbling just a little. "You don't know me, Roderick. You think I'm just some spoiled brat who doesn't care about anything." "Maybe I don't know everything about you," he said, sitting beside her. "But I've seen enough to know you're not as shallow as you want people to believe." His words struck a nerve, and for once, Ayana didn't have a snarky reply. She stared at the rain, her mind racing. "You're annoying," she finally said, her tone light but lacking its usual bite. "And you're infuriating," Roderick replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time, they sat in companionable silence, the tension between them shifting into something neither of them fully understood. The quiet night in the gazebo left Ayana with a strange, lingering warmth she didn't want to admit. Over the following days, she avoided the party scene. Her usual friends noticed her absence, but Ayana found herself spending more time wandering alone, lost in thought. Meanwhile, Roderick struggled with his own internal conflict. The disciplined officer had always lived by the rules, keeping his personal life separate from his duties. But Ayana had somehow slipped past his defenses, leaving him frustrated and intrigued. One afternoon, Ayana stood outside an old, abandoned theater downtown. It was a place she hadn't visited in years, a fragment of her childhood she preferred to leave buried. The once vibrant building was now crumbling, its grandeur reduced to decay. "Why do you keep coming back here?" Warren's voice startled her. She turned to see her cousin standing nearby, his expression both concerned and accusing. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Ayana said sharply, shoving her hands into her jacket pockets. "This place reminds you of your parents, doesn't it?" he pressed, ignoring her defensive tone. Ayana flinched. "Don't start, Warren. Not now." "They wouldn't want this for you, Ayana," Warren said softly. "They wouldn't want you to keep running from their memory." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. You don't know what they would have wanted. They're not here. And whose fault is that? Warren's words were harsh, but they cut straight to the heart of Ayana's guilt. Before she could respond, Ayana turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the hollow silence of the empty street. That night, Ayana found herself at a local bar. She wasn't there to drink. She just needed noise to drown out the chaos in her mind. But as fate would have it, trouble had a way of finding her. A group of rowdy men at a nearby table had clearly had too much to drink. Their loud, obnoxious laughter filled the room as they eyed Ayana like a predator eyeing its prey. One of them approached her, his smirk sending shivers down her spine. "Hey there, sweetheart. You here alone?" Ayana glared at him, her voice cold, not interested. The man's smile widened. "Come on, don't be like that. I just want to have some fun." Before Ayana could respond, the man grabbed her wrist, his grip tight and unwelcome. "Let go of me," she snapped, struggling to free herself. "Is there a problem here?" The deep, commanding voice sent a wave of relief through Ayana. She turned to see Roderick standing behind her, his expression dark and dangerous. The man sneered. "What's it to you, cop?" "It's everything to me," Roderick replied, his voice low but menacing. "Now let her go before you regret it." The man hesitated, but the look in Roderick's eyes convinced him to back off. He released Ayana with a scoff and returned to his group, muttering under his breath. "Do you have a death wish?" Roderick asked Ayana once the danger had passed. "I didn't ask for your help," she snapped, her pride stinging. "Maybe not, but you needed it," he shot back. Their argument was cut short when the bartender, recognizing the escalating tension, asked them to leave. Outside, the cool night air was a stark contrast to the heated emotions between them. "Why are you always in the middle of trouble?" Roderick asked, his frustration evident. "Why are you always there to bail me out?" Ayana countered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and emotions neither of them was ready to confront. Roderick insisted on walking Ayana home, despite her protests. As they strolled through the quiet streets, the tension between them began to ease. "You're not what I expected," Ayana said suddenly. Roderick glanced at her, his brow raised. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You're so rigid. By the book. But there's more to you, isn't there?" He sighed, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I could say the same about you. You act like nothing matters, but I think you care more than you let on." Ayana looked away, her defenses rising again. "You don't know anything about me." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I'd like to." His honesty caught her off guard, leaving her unsure how to respond. They walked in silence until they reached her apartment building. "Thanks," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. Roderick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Ayana." As he walked away, Ayana watched him go, her heart heavy with emotions she didn't fully understand. The next morning, Ayana woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was a text from Warren. "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe." She groaned but reluctantly agreed. When she arrived, Warren was already waiting for her, his expression serious. "What's so important?" she asked, sitting across from him. "You need to stop this, Ayana," he said without preamble. "The parties, the drinking, the reckless behavior. It's not sustainable." Ayana rolled her eyes. "Here we go again with the lectures." "This isn't a lecture. It's a warning," Warren said firmly. "You're spiraling, and if you don't get your act together, you're going to lose everything." His words hit harder than Ayana wanted to admit. She crossed her arms, trying to mask her vulnerability. "Why do you even care?" "Because you're family," Warren said simply, "and because I know you're better than this." For once, Ayana didn't argue. She stared at her coffee, her mind racing. As she left the cafe, Ayana found herself wandering aimlessly through the city. She eventually ended up at the park, where she found Roderick sitting on a bench, looking lost in thought. "Do you always brood in public?" she asked, her tone teasing but gentle. Roderick looked up, surprised to see her. "Ayana, what are you doing here?" "Thinking," she admitted, sitting beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a while before Ayana spoke again. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Roderick hesitated before answering. "Because I see something in you, Ayana. Something worth saving." His words left her speechless, her walls beginning to crumble. For the first time in a long time, Ayana felt seen, not as a lost cause, but as someone who still had a chance to find her way. The park was quiet, save for the distant laughter of children playing and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Ayana and Roderick sat side by side, the tension between them softening into something more fragile. "What do you think you see in me?" Ayana asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Roderick turned to her, his dark eyes studying her face. "I see someone who's fighting a battle they don't want anyone to know about. Someone who's scared to let anyone in because they've been hurt before." Ayana swallowed hard, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. "And what makes you think I want to be saved?" "You might not want it," he said simply, "but you need it." His words hung in the air, and Ayana didn't know how to respond. For years, she had kept people at arm's length, afraid that letting them in would only lead to more pain. But Roderick's quiet persistence was chipping away at her defenses in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I don't know how to be anything other than this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "You don't have to figure it out alone," Roderick said softly. "You just have to let someone help you." For a moment, Ayana considered the possibility of letting her guard down, of allowing herself to trust him. But the weight of her past held her back, and she stood abruptly, her walls snapping back into place. "I should go," she said, avoiding his gaze. Roderick didn't stop her, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't giving up. The next day, Ayana found herself at the community center, an unfamiliar sense of curiosity drawing her there. It was a place she had avoided for years, dismissing it as a hub for people who were nothing like her. But something about her conversation with Roderick lingered in her mind, pushing her to step out of her comfort zone. Inside, the center was bustling with activity. Children laughed as they painted colorful murals on the walls, while volunteers sorted donations and organized events. Ayana felt out of place, unsure of where to begin. "Can I help you?" The voice belonged to a young woman with a bright smile and kind eyes. Her name tag read Leah. I'm just looking around," Ayana said awkwardly. "Well, if you're interested, we're always looking for volunteers," Leah said. "You don't need any special skills, just a willingness to help." Ayana hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to leave. But before she could make an excuse, Leah handed her a paintbrush and led her to the mural the children were working on. "Here," Leah said, pointing to an empty section of the wall, "you can add something of your own." As Ayana dipped the brush into the paint, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to focus on something simple, something untainted by the chaos of her life. When she stepped back to admire her work, she noticed a small, shy smile forming on her lips. Later that evening, Ayana returned to her apartment, her mind still buzzing with thoughts of the community center. She was surprised to find Warren waiting for her outside, his expression a mix of frustration and relief. "You've been avoiding me," he said bluntly. "I've been busy," Ayana replied, brushing past him to unlock her door. Warren followed her inside, his tone turning sharp. "You can't keep shutting me out, Ayana. I'm trying to help you." "I didn't ask for your help," she snapped, her temper flaring. "No, but you need it," Warren shot back. "You're my family, Ayana. I'm not going to just stand by and watch you self-destruct." His words struck a nerve, and Ayana's anger gave way to a surge of guilt. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, her voice trembling. Warren sat beside her, his tone softening. You don't have to do it alone, but you have to let people in, Ayana. You can't keep running from the people who care about you. His sincerity was disarming, and for the first time, Ayana allowed herself to lean on him, even if just a little. Encouraged by her experience at the community center, Ayana decided to return the following week. She found herself drawn to the simple act of creating something beautiful, of contributing to a place that seemed to radiate hope and kindness. One afternoon, as she worked on the mural, Roderick walked into the center. His presence caught her off guard, and she felt a flicker of both annoyance and gratitude. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "I volunteer here sometimes," he said casually, grabbing a box of supplies. Ayana raised an eyebrow. "You? Volunteering?" "Don't act so surprised," Roderick said with a smirk. "I'm full of surprises." Despite herself, Ayana found herself smiling. They worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon, their banter light and easy. For the first time, Ayana felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. As the sun began to set, Roderick turned to her, his expression serious. "You're stronger than you think, Ayana. You just have to believe it." His words stayed with her long after he left, and as she walked home that evening, Ayana realized that she was beginning to believe it, too. Ayana's steps slowed as she approached her apartment door that evening. Her mind was restless, replaying Roderick's words, "You're stronger than you think." The weight of those words felt like both a comfort and a challenge, one she wasn't sure she could rise to. Inside, the dimly lit room felt colder than usual. She threw her bag onto the couch and slumped into a chair, staring at the ceiling. The silence didn't last long. Her phone buzzed on the table, and when she glanced at the screen, her stomach tightened. It was a text from her estranged mother, a single message that unraveled memories she had fought to suppress. "Call me when you're ready to stop running, Ayana." The words hit her like a punch. She hadn't spoken to her mother in years, and she didn't plan to start now. But as she tried to shake it off, memories came flooding back. Arguments that echoed through their home, the feeling of never being good enough, and the day Ayana had walked out and sworn to never look back. Her fingers hovered over the delete button, but something stopped her. Instead, she threw the phone across the couch and buried her face in her hands. The following morning, Ayana found herself standing outside the community center again, the weight of her mother's message still heavy on her mind. She walked inside, hoping the noise and activity would drown out her thoughts. Roderick was already there, talking to Leah as they sorted supplies. He spotted Ayana and waved her over. "You're early," he said with a grin. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, grabbing a paintbrush and heading toward the mural without further explanation. Roderick watched her work in silence for a while before approaching her. "You okay?" Ayana hesitated, her brush pausing mid-stroke. "Why do you always ask that?" "Because I know you're not," he said simply. She put the brush down and turned to face him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't know anything about me, Roderick. You don't know what I've been through, what I've done." "I know you're carrying something heavy," he interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "And I know you're scared to let anyone help you carry it." His words broke something in her, and before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "My mother messaged me last night." Roderick's expression softened. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. "She's the reason I am the way I am. She made me feel like I'd never be enough, like I didn't deserve to be happy. And now she wants me to come back and pretend like everything's fine?" Roderick didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat down beside her, giving her space to collect her thoughts. "You don't owe her anything," he said finally, "but maybe talking to her could help you let go of some of that anger. Not for her, but for yourself." Ayana looked at him, unsure of what to say. A part of her wanted to reject his advice, to cling to the walls she had built around herself. But another part of her, the part that was tired of carrying the weight of her past, was beginning to wonder if he was right. That evening, Ayana sat in her car outside the police station, waiting for Warren. She had promised him earlier that she would try to stay out of trouble, but her mind was elsewhere. When Warren finally emerged from the station, he looked exhausted. He spotted Ayana and frowned. "What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd pick you up," she said casually, though her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Warren got into the passenger seat, his eyebrows furrowed. "What's going on, Ayana? You never do things like this." She hesitated, staring straight ahead. "Do you think people can change?" Warren blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Depends on the person, I guess." "Why?" "I've been thinking about everything," she admitted. "About the mess I've made, the people I've hurt. I don't know if I can fix it, but I'm tired of feeling like this." Warren studied her for a moment before nodding. "You can change, Ayana, but it's not going to be easy. You have to want it, and you have to work for it." His words echoed in her mind as she drove him home. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than the chaos she had created. The next day, Ayana decided to call her mother. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, and she almost hung up when the phone started ringing. "Hello?" Her mother's voice answered, tentative and unsure. "It's me," Ayana said, her voice barely audible. There was a pause on the other end before her mother spoke again. "Ayana, I didn't think you'd call." "I almost didn't," Ayana admitted, "but I think we need to talk." The conversation that followed was tense and awkward, but it was a start. Ayana didn't forgive her mother, and her mother didn't magically become the parent Ayana had always wanted. But they both acknowledged the pain they had caused each other, and for the first time, Ayana felt a tiny bit lighter. When she hung up, she found herself dialing another number, Roderick's. "Hey," he answered after the first ring. "I did it," she said, her voice steady. "Did what?" "I called her. My mom," she said. "And I think I'm ready to start trying. To change." There was a pause, and then Roderick's voice came through the line, warm and encouraging. "I'm proud of you, Ayana. That's a big step." As she ended the call, Ayana felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she was willing to take it one step at a time. Ayana's resolve to change was tested almost immediately. The following morning, as she walked into the community center, she was greeted by Vanessa's furious expression. "I thought we agreed you'd stop dragging me into your messes," Vanessa snapped, crossing her arms. Ayana sighed, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "I know I screwed up, Vanessa, and I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about how it would affect you." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the apology. "Wait, did you just say you're sorry?" "Yes, I did," Ayana said with a weak smile. "Don't get used to it." Vanessa studied her for a moment before softening. "You really mean it, don't you?" "I do," Ayana said. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About the way I've treated you, Warren, even Roderick. I don't want to keep pushing people away." Vanessa's expression shifted to one of cautious optimism. "Well, it's about time. But if you mess up again, I'm going to personally drag you to therapy." Ayana chuckled, the first genuine laugh she'd had in a while. Fair enough. As Ayana worked to rebuild her relationships, Roderick remained a steady presence in her life. But beneath his calm exterior, he was dealing with his own struggles. One evening, after everyone had left the community center, Ayana found him sitting alone in the office, staring at an old photograph. "Hey," she said, knocking lightly on the door frame. Roderick quickly put the photo away and smiled. "Hey, what's up?" "I could ask you the same thing," Ayana said, stepping inside. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" He hesitated, his usual composure faltering. "It's nothing. Just old memories." "Roderick," Ayana said softly, sitting across from him, "you're always there for me. Let me be there for you." He looked at her, the weight of his unspoken pain evident in his eyes. Finally, he sighed and pulled out the photograph, a picture of a young woman with a bright smile. "Her name was Eliza," he said. "We were engaged until a car accident took her away." Ayana's breath caught in her throat. "I'm so sorry, Roderick. I didn't know." "It's been years, but some days, it feels like it just happened," he admitted. "That's why I threw myself into my work. Helping others makes the pain a little more bearable." Ayana reached out and placed a hand on his. "You're not alone, Roderick. You don't have to carry this by yourself." For the first time, Roderick allowed himself to lean on someone else, and Ayana felt a newfound determination to be the kind of person he could depend on. Ayana's progress didn't go unnoticed by Warren, who cautiously began to trust her again. Over dinner at his place, he brought up a topic that made her pause. "There's a leadership program coming up in the city," Warren said, handing her a brochure. "It's designed for people who want to make a difference in their communities." Ayana looked at the brochure skeptically. "You think I should apply?" "I think you could surprise yourself," Warren said. "You've got the passion, Ayana. You just need to channel it into something productive." The idea of taking on something so serious was daunting, but Ayana couldn't deny the spark of interest it ignited. "I'll think about it," she said, tucking the brochure into her bag. "That's all I ask," Warren said with a smile. A week later, Ayana found herself at the leadership program's orientation. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, each with their own stories and reasons for being there. As the program director introduced himself, Ayana glanced around, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was her chance to prove to herself and everyone else that she could be more than her past mistakes. During a group activity, she was paired with a young woman named Clara, who was passionate about environmental advocacy. They quickly bonded over their shared determination to make a difference, and Ayana began to see the potential for real change in herself and others. That evening, as she walked home, Ayana felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The road to redemption was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she was heading in the right direction. The leadership program opened doors Ayana never thought possible. She was forced to confront not just the mistakes she had made, but the deeper reasons behind her reckless behavior. Through workshops and honest conversations with others, she began to see a pattern in her life, an endless cycle of defiance, loneliness, and pain. One evening, during a reflective session, Ayana wrote a letter to herself. It wasn't an apology, it was a promise to break free from her destructive tendencies and become someone she could be proud of. While Ayana was on her journey, Roderick was dealing with his own challenges. The anniversary of Eliza's death was approaching, and it reopened wounds he thought had healed. When Ayana found him sitting in his office late one night, she decided to help him the way he had helped her. "You told me once that helping others eases the pain," Ayana said, sitting beside him. "But when was the last time you let someone help you?" Roderick looked at her, his eyes heavy with emotion. "It's not that simple." "It never is," she said, taking his hand. "But that doesn't mean you have to carry it alone." For the first time, Roderick allowed himself to truly open up. They talked for hours, sharing their fears, regrets, and dreams. By the time the sun rose, both felt lighter, like the weight of their pasts no longer defined them. Months later, Ayana stood in front of a packed auditorium, giving a speech as one of the leadership program's keynote speakers. Her journey from chaos to clarity had been long and grueling, but it had shaped her into someone she never thought she could be. "I used to think happiness came from doing whatever I wanted, no matter who got hurt," she told the crowd. "But I've learned that true happiness comes from connection, from purpose, and from facing the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore." In the audience, Roderick and Vanessa beamed with pride. Warren sat beside them, clapping louder than anyone else. After the event, Roderick approached Ayana. "You were incredible up there," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Thanks," she said with a shy smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You've done the work," he replied. "You've earned this." As they walked out of the auditorium together, Ayana looked around at the people who had stood by her through everything. She had hurt them, pushed them away, and tested their patience, but they had never given up on her. And now, she wasn't giving up on herself. A year later, Ayana opened her own community center, dedicated to helping young people channel their energy into creative and productive outlets. It became a haven for those who felt misunderstood, just as Ayana once had. Roderick, now a frequent collaborator with the center, worked closely with Ayana on outreach programs. Their relationship evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. Vanessa, still Ayana's loudest critic and fiercest supporter, joined the center as a mentor, using her experiences to guide others. As for Warren, he finally stopped worrying about Ayana. She's her own force of nature, he would say proudly. You just have to let her shine. Standing on the balcony of her center one evening, Ayana watched the sunset, a symbol of the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another. She no longer lived in the shadow of her mistakes. Instead, she walked forward with purpose, knowing that she could create her own light. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.